Hello and welcome to another video about raspiBackup. I got feedback that I unfortunately missed to provide a video about the restore process you have to execute in order to restore a backup with raspiBackup. So that's what I'm doing right now, and I hope you will be able to restore a backup with raspiBackup when you're finished to view this video. So that's what I'm going to talk about. I will talk about the prerequisites to create or to restore a backup, the methods, how to restore a backup, the options you have, also which steps you have to execute in order to prepare the restore. Next, I will give you a demo. I will restore an SD Rsync backup on an SD card. And last but not least, I will explain the differences whenever you execute a different restore, for example, for an USB boot backup or mixed backup. So, what's the prerequisite? Depending on the system you use to restore your backup, you have to have nevertheless a monitor, keyboard and mouse. On a Windows system, you only can use and restore a DD backup. So whenever you want to use a TAR or Rsync backup, and I suggest to use an Rsync backup, you have to use a Linux system. So this can be either some distribution like Ubuntu Debian or something like this. It's not general supported, but it works in general. So just give it a try, and if it works, then you're fine. And if it doesn't work, then okay, that's the alternative I strongly recommend to use. To use a Raspberry running with a Raspberry OS, because then you're sure that the OS running the restore also matches to the OS which is used for the restore. If you have a monitor connected to the Raspberry, then, well, you'll need an additional mouse. And in most cases, as far as I see, you don't have a monitor available and you have to access the Raspberry from remote. Then if you have a light or desktop version, then from Windows you need PuTTY or SSH, and from Linux you need SSH. And if you have a desktop version installed on your Raspberry, then you need VNC, either from Windows or from Linux. Next, you need an SD card adapter whenever you want to restore to an SD card. And, well, you also need an USB SSD disk whenever you want to restore a USB boot backup or a mixed backup. I just talked about the mixed backup on older Raspberries which don't support USB boot. You have to restore an SD card which actually only has the boot partition, and also the USB SSD disk on a different disk. Which restore methods are available? On Windows you can use Win32 Disk Imager, Etcher, or, well, I think there's another tool called Rufus or something like this. I frankly don't know much about Windows, but keep in mind you only can restore a DD backup on Windows. All the other backup types, if you want to restore them, you have to use a Linux system. Frankly, I don't recommend to use Windows, but to use a Linux system, and in particularly in Raspberry for the restore, because that's the best thing you can do. The benefit you also have if you use a Raspberry, well, you can use the Raspberry you use to run your system. So if you have to restore an operating system of this Raspberry, just use the Raspberry to restore the backup and plug in the SD card again, the restored SD card, and then you're fine. The system will boot up again. And well, also make sure that you have prepared an SD card beforehand for the restore, because I know that a lot of people are getting very nervous whenever they have to restore a backup, and so it's a good idea to make sure that everything is prepared to execute the restore whenever this happens and you have to do it. Well, there are not much restore options for raspiBackup. There's an -d. There you have to define the device to restore the backup, which is either an SD card if you have an SD card backup, and an USB device if you restore a USB boot backup. Keep in mind the whole device will be partitioned and formatted, so all data will be deleted, and make sure that you use the right device in this as an option for -d, because otherwise you will delete important data by error. Next, there's an option -g, just to display a restore progress information. And whenever you still use an old Raspberry which is not able to use USB boot, you have to provide the SD card in option -d and the USB disk or SSD partition to restore the root file system with -r. Again, this partition will be formatted, and make sure that you choose the right partition. In addition, this partition also has to be allocated already and has to exist. And last but not least, you have to pass the backup directory where the backup has to be restored. Let's talk about the preparation. Well, it's not difficult. Just plug in either or the SD card adapter if you have to restore an SD card, and the USB SSD disk if you restore a USB boot backup. On Linux, I strongly recommend to check which device names you actually have to pass in the restore command, and which devices were connected to device names. There's a nice tool called LSBLK which can be used to check which devices are available on your system and what's the name of these devices. Because otherwise, if you pick up the wrong devices, then this may delete your data, your important data. So that's the environment I use to demonstrate the restore. Over here you can see a Raspberry 3. Over here you can see the SD card adapter with a small SD card. Over here you have a device I stored the backup on, and so when I execute the restore, I will pick up the backup directory stored on this device and restore it on this SD card. So let's log on and check what's going on the Raspberry I used to restore the backup. So let's have some bigger. Okay, so here we are. So let's use RaspbianOS to check what's available on the system. We have SDA, that's the device which actually holds the backup data I want to restore. It's a 32 gigabyte device. And we also have SDB, 8 gigabyte device. That's the SD card I want to restore. I want to put the restored image on. And we also have the SD card the system booted from. So then let's check the backup. Here you can see there are 3 different backups versions, and I will pick up the latest one. Here you can see, okay, that's the typical structure of a Linux system with all the subdirectories. I will talk about the benefit whenever you use a Rsync backup later on also. So let's see. Okay, so now I will just start the backup. I will call raspiBackup. Use -d to specify the SD card I want to restore the backup. And I know it's SDB. And, well, last but not least, I also have to pass in the directory of the backup. Please make sure that you use the right directory name, because otherwise you will get an error message telling you, okay, this backup was not created by raspiBackup. So just start the backup, and first of all you will be prompted whether you are sure that SDB is used. Again, make sure it's the right one, because otherwise you will lose data. And now I start the backup. So now the root partition is restored, the boot partition is restored, the root partition is also restored, and in addition the partitioning of the SD card is done. So right now you can see the boot partition is restored, which doesn't take that long. Just to let you know, usually it takes about 10 minutes if you restore a light Raspbian image. If you have much more data, then it will take longer. And if you have a big USB disk you have to restore, then it will indeed take much longer. But nevertheless, it will be faster than to, well, set up the system from scratch again. Okay, you can see that the restoring of the boot partition already happened, and now it starts to restore the root partition. So now let's talk about the differences if you have different backup types. If you have a USB backup, well, then in option D, as I already told you, you have not to use the SD card, which usually is MMC BLK. But instead you have to use something like SDA or SDB or something like this, which is actually the USB disk you want to restore. And for mixed mode setup backup, you have to use the SD card, for Option-D and the USB partition, root partition for Option-R. You can see it's a partition because it's now ending with a number. If it's the device, it just ends with a letter. Let's give you some advice for restore with raspiBackup. I strongly recommend to use a Raspberry for restore, because then you can use Rsync, which is my preferred and suggested backup type. And you also use the same operating system for restore, which is used for the backup, which makes everything much easier. You also should prepare an SD card beforehand, because whenever you have to restore a backup, you are nervous. And it's a good idea to practice the restore process multiple times, to get familiar with the process, to write down some notes if there is something you may forget to execute. And well, just do it. I strongly recommend to do this. In addition, if you use your Raspberry in production, I mean, if you use it for home automation or some other important stuff, then make sure that you have a second Raspberry, because it may happen that the hardware fails, and so you have a backup. And in addition, this second Raspberry can be used to restore a backup, and also can be used to test any updates on your production system. raspiBackup will remind you to test the restore process every 6 months, and I strongly recommend to do this. It's not that easy if you have a terabyte USB disk, but then just create a small SD card OS and test the backup and restore, just to practice again the restore process. Okay, so now I want to just tell you why I suggest to use Rsync and not any other backup method. Because just a couple of days ago, I unfortunately deleted a home directory on one of my Raspberries by error. But because I have an Rsync backup, it was quite easy for me to restore this home directory. Why this? Let's go into the backup directory. Here you can see you actually have the directory structure which is used on a Linux system in the backup. So it was quite easy for me to restore the home directory. I just went into the home directory of Pi. Here you can see, oh, okay, here I have all the files of my home directory, so I could just easily copy the contents of this directory back to my Raspberry, and the home directory was there again. So you don't have to restore the whole backup. In a lot of cases you just need to restore portions of the backup, and it's much easier if you have an Rsync backup. In addition, it happens a lot of time that you do some modifications on your system, and at at some point in time, well, you don't remember what the original contents was because you did so much changes. And so just go into the backup directory. For example, the etc directory is an interesting directory which holds a lot of configuration definitions. Then you can just either inspect the contents, for example, of the FS tab. You can see I have defined an NFS share to use at the backup because I don't use an USB disk to back up the code. Or, well, here you also can see I also used a Samba file share to access and exchange some data. So if you accidentally deleted this information on your production system, then just look it up and copy it back to your system, then you're fine. Okay, so that's it. I hope you have an idea how to restore your backup with raspiBackup, and I hope you will not have to execute this procedure, but well, it will happen for sure. So make sure you practice the restore backup, and then, well, it will take some time, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, but then your system will be up and running again. Okay, so that's it for now.